Watch how wealthy people move through the world and you'll notice something strange. They don't see what you see, they're not looking at the same things, they're not asking the same questions, they're operating with a completely different lens, a different framework for understanding value and opportunity and risk. And this isn't about intelligence or education or some genetic gift, it's about perspective. It's about having learned to see patterns that most people miss because most people are looking at the wrong things, asking the wrong questions, optimizing for the wrong outcomes. And once you understand what the rich are actually looking at, what they're actually paying attention to, the gap between their results and everyone else's results starts to make sense. The fundamental difference is this: most people think in terms of income, the rich think in terms of assets. Most people ask, how much does this pay? The rich ask, what does this own? Most people optimize for salary, the rich optimize for equity, for ownership, for pieces of systems that generate value whether they're actively working or not. And this isn't just a financial distinction. It's a completely different way of understanding what work is for, what money is for, what you're actually trying to build. Because if you're thinking in terms of income, you're thinking about trading time for money. You're thinking about how to get paid more per hour. But if you're thinking in terms of assets, you're thinking about how to build things that pay you while you sleep, how to own pieces of value-generating systems, how to make money work for you instead of you working for money. Most people are taught to be employees, to find a good job, to climb the ladder, to get raises and promotions, and there's nothing wrong with employment. But the wealthy understand that employment is fundamentally limited. There are only so many hours you can work. There's a ceiling on what anyone will pay you for your time. And if all you're doing is trading time for money, you're trapped in a system where your income is capped by your time. Whereas ownership isn't capped. A business can scale. An investment can multiply, equity can compound, and the person who owns even a small piece of something valuable can make more than the person who works full-time for that thing. And this is the secret that employment obscures. The real money isn't in working for the system, it's in owning pieces of the system. The rich also have a completely different relationship to risk. Most people think risk is something to avoid. They optimize for safety, for guarantees, for the secure option. But the wealthy understand that risk and reward are correlated, that the safest path is often the path to mediocrity, that avoiding all risk means avoiding all significant upside, and they've learned to distinguish between stupid risk and calculated risk, between gambling and strategic betting, between recklessness and courage. And what looks like fearlessness from the outside is usually just a more sophisticated understanding of what the actual risks are, because the rich aren't fearless. They're just afraid of different things. They're more afraid of missing opportunities than of making mistakes, more afraid of staying small than of failing big, more afraid of not trying than of trying and losing. There's also a difference in time horizon. Most people think in terms of months or years. The rich think in terms of decades. Most people want immediate returns. The rich are willing to plant trees they won't sit under, to make investments that won't pay off for 10 or 20 years, to build things slowly because they understand that real wealth compounds, that the power of growth over time is exponential, not linear. That patient capital beats urgent capital, that the person who can wait can extract better terms, better deals, better outcomes than the person who needs results now. And this patience isn't about being passive, it's about understanding that some things can't be rushed, that forcing short-term results often destroys long-term value, that the highest returns go to the people who can afford to wait. Another pattern: the rich focus on leverage. They're always asking, how can I get more output from the same input? How can I multiply my effort? What tools or systems or people can amplify what I'm doing? And this is why they're obsessed with things like automation and delegation and building teams and creating systems, because they understand that their time is the bottleneck, that there are only 24 hours in a day, and if they're the one doing everything, then everything is limited by their personal capacity. But if they can build systems where other people or technology or capital is doing the work, then their output isn't limited by their time, it's limited by the quality of the system they've built. Most people think about money as something you earn and spend. The rich think about money as something you deploy, as a tool, as ammunition, as something you use to make more money. And this completely changes the relationship to saving and spending. Most people save what's left after spending. The rich invest first and spend what's left. Most people see their paycheck as money to use. The rich see their paycheck as capital to deploy. And even when they're not wealthy yet, even when they're still building, they're thinking in these terms. They're asking, where can I put this money so it grows? Not, what can I buy with this money? And this shift in thinking, this treating money as a tool rather than a goal, is one of the most fundamental differences in mindset. The wealthy also understand that most value is created through exchange, through building things other people want, through solving problems that people will pay to have solved, and they're obsessed with understanding what people actually want versus what people say they want, with finding gaps between what exists and what could exist, with identifying inefficiencies and building solutions. And this is why so many wealthy people are entrepreneurs or investors, because they've learned to see opportunities where other people see only what already exists. They've trained themselves to look at the world and ask, what's missing? What could be better? What problem exists that I could solve? And then they build or fund the things that fill those gaps. There's also a difference in how they think about failure. Most people see failure as evidence that they can't do something. The rich see failure as data, as information about what doesn't work, as a necessary part of figuring out what does work. And this isn't just positive thinking. It's a completely different framework. If you see failure as a referendum on your ability, then each failure makes you less likely to try again. But if you see failure as information, then each failure makes you smarter, makes your next attempt more likely to succeed. And the rich fail constantly. They fail more than most people because they try more things, but they don't interpret the failures the same way. They extract the lesson and move on. They don't take it personally. They don't let it stop them. Another thing the wealthy understand is that attention is currency, that what you pay attention to grows, that where you focus your mental energy determines what you notice and what you miss. And most people pay attention to things they can't control, to news cycles and politics and celebrity gossip and other people's drama. And all of this is just noise. It's entertainment disguised as information. It doesn't help you build anything or learn anything or improve anything. But the rich are ruthlessly selective about what they pay attention to. They focus on things they can influence, on skills they can develop, on relationships they can build, on opportunities they can capture, and they ignore almost everything else because they understand that attention is limited and valuable, and paying attention to the wrong things is one of the fastest ways to stay stuck. The relationship to education is different too. Most people think education ends with school. The rich understand that real education is continuous, that the most valuable learning happens outside of formal institutions, that the ability to teach yourself, to learn from experience, to extract lessons from everything you do, is more valuable than any degree, and they're obsessed with learning, with reading, with finding mentors, with putting themselves in situations where they're the least knowledgeable person in the room, because that's where growth happens. And they don't wait for someone to teach them. They go find the information they need. They ask questions, they experiment, they learn by doing. And this hunger for knowledge, this recognition that learning is never finished, is one of the things that keeps them growing when everyone else plateaus. The wealthy also understand something fundamental about value creation that most people miss. Value isn't inherent, it's perceived, it's contextual. The same thing can be worthless in one context and extremely valuable in another, and the rich are obsessed with arbitrage, with finding things that are undervalued in one place and moving them to where they're valued higher, with recognizing that the gap between what something costs and what someone will pay for it is where profit lies. And this applies to everything, to physical goods, to information, to services, to attention, to access, and learning to see these gaps, learning to recognize when something is mispriced relative to its potential value, is one of the core skills of wealth building. There's also a completely different understanding of what problems are worth solving. Most people solve problems they encounter personally. The rich solve problems that affect large numbers of people. Most people think, this annoys me, I wish it was better. The rich think, this annoys millions of people. If I can fix it at scale, I can build a business. And the difference is magnitude. Solving your own problem might make your life better. Solving a problem that thousands or millions of people have creates massive value, and massive value creation is what generates massive wealth, because you can capture even a tiny fraction of the value you create and still make enormous amounts of money if you're creating value for enough people. The relationship to debt is completely inverted from what most people are taught. Most people think all debt is bad, something to avoid and eliminate. The rich understand that there's good debt and bad debt, that debt used to acquire income-generating assets as leverage, is using other people's money to amplify your returns. That if you can borrow at 5% and invest at 10%, you should borrow as much as you possibly can because you're making money on the spread. And this is terrifying to most people because they've been taught that debt is dangerous, that you should never owe money. But the wealthy understand that intelligent use of debt is one of the fastest ways to build wealth. That being afraid of all debt is like being afraid of all tools because hammers can hurt you if you use them wrong. Another pattern. The rich are comfortable with ambiguity and complexity. They don't need everything to be simple and clear before they act. They're willing to operate in gray areas, to make decisions with incomplete information, to navigate systems that aren't straightforward. And this tolerance for ambiguity is a huge advantage because the clearest opportunities are usually already taken. The most obvious paths are the most crowded. The real opportunities exist in the messy, complex spaces that Most people avoid because they're uncomfortable with uncertainty, and if you need everything to be simple and guaranteed before you'll engage with it, you're automatically excluding yourself from most of the opportunities that actually exist. The wealthy also think about taxes completely differently. Most people accept whatever tax bill they get. The rich understand that taxes are negotiable, not in the sense of not paying them but in the sense of structuring your income and investments to minimize them legally, and they spend time and money on tax strategy because they understand that it's not what you make that matters, it's what you keep. That paying 30% less in taxes on the same income is equivalent to making 30% more. And most people don't think about this because they're employees with simple tax situations, but the moment you start owning things, investing in things, building things, tax strategy becomes one of the highest return activities you can engage in because you're keeping money you would have otherwise given away. There's also a difference in how they think about relationships and networks. Most people think about relationships in personal terms, in terms of friendship and connection. The rich think about relationships strategically without being transactional. They understand that who you know determines what opportunities you access, that your network is your net worth, that being connected to the right people opens doors that no amount of hard work can open, and they're intentional about building relationships with people who are ahead of where they want to be, with people who have skills or knowledge or access they don't have. And this isn't fake or manipulative. It's just recognizing that humans are tribal and collaborative and most valuable things happen through cooperation and that being isolated is a massive disadvantage. The rich also understand the power of narrative and perception, that the story people tell about you matters almost as much as what you actually do, that reputation is a multiplier, that being known for something specific, being associated with certain qualities or achievements, opens opportunities that being anonymous forecloses, and they're thoughtful about how they present themselves, about what they're known for, about managing their public perception not out of vanity but out of strategic understanding that perception shapes reality, that the opportunities that come to you are determined by what people think you're capable of. And if people don't know what you can do, if you haven't built a reputation for being good at something specific, you won't get the chances to prove yourself. Another thing, the wealthy are much more willing to pay for expertise, to hire specialists, to recognize when something is outside their competency and bring in someone who knows what they're doing. Most people try to do everything themselves either because they think they can't afford help or because they think asking for help is weakness, but the rich understand that doing things you're bad at is expensive even if it's free, that your time has opportunity cost, that the hours you spend struggling with something outside your expertise are hours you're not spending on things you're actually good at, and they'd rather pay someone to do it right and quickly than waste time doing it wrong and slowly. The perspective on competition is different too. Most people think competition is about being better than others, about winning by making someone else lose. The rich understand that the best competition is competition with yourself, that the real game is becoming more capable over time, that trying to beat specific competitors is limiting because you're defining yourself relative to them. But if you're focused on becoming better than you were yesterday, on expanding your capabilities, on learning and growing, then you're not capped by anyone else's performance, you're only capped by your own commitment to improvement. And paradoxically, this often leads to better competitive outcomes because you're not constrained by what others are doing, you're just maximizing your own potential. There's also a fundamental difference in how they think about problems versus opportunities. Most people see problems and try to avoid them. The rich see problems and get excited because every problem is a potential business. Every inefficiency is an opportunity. Every complaint is market research, and they've trained themselves to reframe obstacles as possibilities, to look at what's broken and ask, how could I fix this at scale? To look at what's annoying and ask, who else finds this annoying and how much would they pay to make it go away? And this reframing, this ability to see opportunity in difficulty, is one of the most valuable mindset shifts because it means you're never stuck, you're never just complaining, you're always thinking, how could this be better and how could I be the one to make it better? The wealthy also have a different relationship to consumption and signaling. Most people use money to signal status, to show that they've made it, to buy things that announce their success, and this is a trap because it's spending money to impress people instead of using money to build more money. The rich early in their wealth building are much more likely to drive old cars and live modestly because they understand that every dollar spent on signaling is a dollar that's not compounding, that looking rich and being rich are often opposite strategies, that the people who look wealthy are often not wealthy, they're just good at spending money, whereas the people who are actually building wealth are often indistinguishable from average because they're more interested in being rich than in looking rich. Another pattern. They think about scarcity and abundance differently. Most people operate from scarcity, from the belief that there's not enough to go around, that someone else winning means they're losing, that resources are fixed and finite. The rich operate from abundance, from the understanding that value can be created, that markets can grow, that helping others succeed often comes back to you, that there's enough for everyone who's willing to create it. And this isn't naive optimism, it's a more sophisticated understanding of how value works, that value isn't zero-sum, that one person getting rich doesn't make you poorer unless they're stealing from you, and that creating more value for others is how you create value for yourself. The rich are also much more likely to think in terms of systems and processes rather than events and outcomes. Most people think, I want to make $1 million. The rich think, I want to build a system that generates $1 million. Most people focus on the goal. The rich focus on the process that leads to the goal. And this is crucial because goals are static, but systems are dynamic. A goal once achieved is done. But a system that achieves the goal can achieve it repeatedly, can be refined and improved and scaled. And focusing on building robust systems rather than chasing specific outcomes is what creates sustainable long-term wealth rather than one-time windfalls. Here's what all of this comes down to. The wealthy don't just have more money, they have different operating systems, different mental models for how the world works. And those mental models lead to different decisions which lead to different outcomes. And the gap between average outcomes and wealthy outcomes isn't primarily about effort or intelligence or luck. It's about framework. It's about what you're optimizing for, what you're paying attention to, what questions you're asking, what you believe is possible. And most people are running outdated software. They're operating with frameworks they inherited from parents or absorbed from culture without ever questioning whether those frameworks actually work, whether they lead to the outcomes they want. The shift from thinking like an employee to thinking like an owner is one of the most fundamental changes you can make. And it doesn't require you to quit your job or start a business tomorrow. It requires you to start asking different questions, to start looking at everything through the lens of ownership, to start thinking about how you could own pieces of value-generating systems instead of just trading time for money, to start treating money as capital to deploy rather than income to spend. And this shift in thinking precedes the shift in circumstances. You start thinking differently, and then you start seeing opportunities you didn't see before. You start making different choices, you start building different things, and gradually your outcomes change because your framework changed. Most people are waiting for their circumstances to change so they can start thinking differently. The rich understand that you have to start thinking differently first, and then your circumstances change in response. You can't think like an employee and expect to become wealthy. You have to adopt the mental models of wealth first. And then those mental models guide you toward decisions and actions that create wealth. And this is why studying wealthy people, reading what they read, understanding how they think, is so valuable. You're not copying their specific strategies because what worked for them might not work for you. You're absorbing their frameworks, their ways of seeing the world, their mental models for understanding value and opportunity and risk. Another critical piece is understanding that wealth building is a skill that can be learned. It's not magic. It's not reserved for people born into it or people with special talents. It's a set of learnable mental models and behaviors. And like any skill, it requires practice and patience and willingness to fail and learn. Most people never develop this skill because they never try. They assume wealth is about luck or connections or starting with money. And while those things can help, they're not the determining factors. The determining factor is whether you're willing to learn how to think about money and value and opportunity in ways that most people don't. The wealthy also understand that information asymmetry is where value lives, that knowing things other people don't know, seeing things other people don't see, understanding dynamics that aren't obvious, is how you find opportunities before they're competed away. And this is why they invest so heavily in learning, in getting access to rooms and conversations and information sources that most people don't have access to, because they understand that being informed is a competitive advantage. That seeing opportunities earlier than others means you can act on them when the risk-reward ratio is still favorable, before everyone else piles in and drives up the price or drives down the returns. There's also something crucial about the wealthy's relationship to money that most people miss. They don't worship it, they're not emotionally attached to it, they see it as a tool, as a scorecard, as stored energy, but not as the thing itself, not as the goal. And this emotional detachment is powerful because it means they can be rational about it, they can take risks with it, they can lose some of it without it destroying them emotionally. They can make decisions based on strategy rather than fear or greed. And most people can't do this because they're so emotionally entangled with money, so anxious about not having enough or losing what they have, that they can't think clearly about it. The paradox is that the people who are least attached to money are often the ones who make the most of it, because they can treat it rationally. They can deploy it strategically, they can take calculated risks, they can invest in things that won't pay off for years because they're not desperate for immediate returns, and this emotional distance from money is something you can cultivate. It starts with having enough that you're not in survival mode, but it continues with deliberately practicing seeing money as a tool rather than a goal, with making decisions based on strategy rather than emotion, with building systems that work even when you're not thinking about money constantly. What I want you to understand is that adopting these frameworks doesn't require you to become someone you're not. It doesn't require you to abandon your values or become ruthlessly selfish or turn into some caricature of a wealthy person. The mental models of wealth are compatible with being a good person, with caring about others, with wanting to make the world better. In fact, some of the wealthiest people are wealthy precisely because they solved problems that made other people's lives better. Because they created value for others at scale. The frameworks aren't about being greedy, they're about being strategic, about understanding how value works, about building things that matter. The practical application of all of this is simpler than it sounds. Start paying attention to assets instead of just income. Start looking for problems you could solve at scale instead of just solving problems for yourself. Start thinking about how you could use leverage to multiply your efforts. Start treating money as capital to deploy instead of just cash to spend. Start investing in learning and skill development and relationship building. Start looking at debt as a tool instead of something to be feared. Start focusing on building systems instead of chasing goals. Start thinking in decades instead of months. And none of this requires you to be wealthy already. These are frameworks you can adopt right now that will gradually change your trajectory. The gap between where you are and where you want to be isn't primarily about resources or connections or luck. It's about the frameworks you're using to understand the world. And if you're using frameworks that lead to employee outcomes, you'll get employee outcomes regardless of how hard you work. But if you start using frameworks that lead to owner outcomes, that lead to wealth-building outcomes, you'll start moving in that direction even if the progress is slow at first, because you'll be making different decisions, seeing different opportunities, building different things, and over time those differences compound into dramatically different results. The wealthy aren't smarter than you, they're not more talented, they're not blessed by luck, they just learn to see the world differently. They learn frameworks that most people never encounter, and those frameworks shape everything they do, every decision they make, every opportunity they pursue or ignore. And the good news is that frameworks can be learned, mental models can be adopted. You can choose to start thinking differently today. You can choose to start asking different questions, optimizing for different things, building toward different outcomes, and that choice, that shift in how you think, is the beginning of everything changing. If you found this valuable, if it gave you new ways of thinking about wealth and opportunity, I'd appreciate if you subscribe to the channel. I create content like this regularly exploring how to think more effectively about money, success, psychology, and building a meaningful life. And your subscription helps me reach more people with these ideas. Here's what I want to leave you with. The mental models of wealth aren't secrets, they're not hidden, they're just uncommon. Most people never encounter them because they're surrounded by other people who don't think this way, who are all using the same limited frameworks, all optimizing for the same limited outcomes. But you can choose different. You can choose to study how wealthy people think, to adopt their frameworks, to start seeing the world through their lens. And that choice doesn't cost you anything except the willingness to question what you've been taught, to think differently than the people around you, to optimize for different things than most people optimize for. You don't need permission to start thinking like this. You don't need to wait until you have money to start thinking about money strategically. You don't need to be wealthy to adopt the mental models of wealth. You just need to choose to see the world differently, to ask different questions, to focus on different things, to build different things, and the rest follows from that choice, not immediately, not magically, but gradually, compoundingly, over time, until one day you look up and realize you're not just thinking differently anymore, you're living differently, building differently, operating in a completely different paradigm than where you started, and that shift, that transformation from one way of seeing to another, is what this is all about.